And the third thing on which our rights are supported is the robust freedom of expression you've got in Australia. Governments are traduced in the media every day. I've seen cabinet ministers almost reduced to tears by the injustice they face. Happens on both sides of politics. And I tell them there's no court of appeal on this one. The media is free. And if it wants to defame you, loudly, noisily, within the limits of the libel laws, it can. Now that's where our freedoms rest on. People say we're the only country without a Charter of Rights or a Bill of Rights, the only advanced country without it, but that's a meaningless statement. We're the only country, virtually the only country with compulsory voting, but it works for us. It's our system, it works for us. And New Zealand adopted a Charter of Rights, but New Zealand hasn't got states. It hasn't got the diffusion of power through a federal system that we have. And it hasn't got an upper house. It hasn't got an upper house elected on proportional representation, in which for the most part the government of the day hasn't a majority. We've got that. It hasn't got a written constitution. We've got that. Britain, yes, Charter of Rights, but they haven't got a written constitution. They haven't got a federal system. And by the way, there's very little evidence that the Charter of Rights in the UK has done anything to enhance freedoms. I pointed out in one of the debates I've been in on this subject that under British law, the police have been warning people that to denounce Scientology can now be interpreted under British statutes as stirring up religious hatred. That's in Britain, with its Charter of Rights. And in Britain, there was a demonstration earlier this year where the police used a certain quartering off technique, and a man caught up in the demonstration, a bypasser, died. He had a heart attack while all this was going on. Now, that happened in Britain with the Charter of Rights. If it had happened in Australia, Geoffrey Robertson and Susan Ryan would be waving it around as proof positive that we needed a Charter of Rights. Now, I say again, Australia is one of the freest countries in the world, and while we should never be complacent about it, we have nothing to be ashamed of in comparing our level of freedom with that exists in countries that have got a charter. There's one thing I want to emphasise more than anything else in my short presentation to you tonight. Any charter in any version represents a shift of power to judges. There's no other way of interpreting it. A charter or a Bill of Rights is an eloquent list of things like freedom of expression, freedom of movement, we can all agree with. But what does it mean in practice? Freedom of expression. The tobacco industry argues it should enjoy it. There are 100 other examples where some other right runs up against freedom of expression. At the present time, the politicians, with all their flaws, try to make decisions to iron it out, and judges under the common law tradition try to work it through. Under a charter or a Bill of Rights, decision-making on the necessary balances end up being made by non-elected judges. And that's what's so important in this for you. When I was Premier, I had a delegation in my office. Cardinal George Pell, Archbishop Peter Jensen, they were concerned about a motion of the Green political party in the State Upper House, the Legislative Council, to bring the churches in under the Anti-Discrimination Act. That was a position I had always opposed. If you're setting up a Baptist school at Maroubra, you ought to be able to discriminate in favour of a Baptist when you're appointing your principal, or an Islamic school. Same principle. It's something I think we'd all grasp very readily. And I said to Cardinal Pell and Archbishop Jensen, I have no disagreement with that. I've thought about this issue, and I think this is a case of justified discrimination. But if there is a charter or a Bill of Rights, it won't be a Premier receiving representations from the churches on this who will make the final decision. My decision was not to support the Green amendment to the Anti-Discrimination Act. It will be judges who will make a decision about whether that behaviour, that is the exclusion of churches from the Anti-Discrimination Act, is compatible with the human rights document. The decision will migrate from the political arena, where you can have an influence on it, to the courts, where you can have no influence. And that's the important point. Under the model that's been put forward by Father Brennan, you've got a massive increase. The real theme of his report is the huge increase in the power of the Human Rights Commission. Indeed, if I understand it correctly, the Human Rights Commission will end up hearing cases about alleged abuse of rights the way at the present time anti-discrimination boards in the states will hear cases about alleged discrimination, or the way the Human Rights Commission hears cases now about anti-discrimination at the federal level. So it makes itself the arbitrator, and the rights it can have reference to are rights not in Australian law but in international charters. And all of a sudden a body that was an advisory body, an educative body, becomes a body swollen with significance, and you don't elect it, the Human Rights Commission. It just showed, in my view, its lack of judgment by launching an inquiry into whether Australia needs religious vilification laws. I've dealt with this before, and I've argued that it would be an exercise in absurdity for us to start saying that certain religious behaviour or religious arguments are outside the law and other religious behaviour or religious arguments are permitted by the law. I quoted Thomas Jefferson, who said, "Whether my neighbour believes in one God or 20 gods, it doesn't matter. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Truth is great and will prevail if left to itself. It's not an area where the state ought to be making itself busy, intervening and trying to sort out religious disputes like that appalling case in Victoria, which resulted from their religious vilification laws, that resulted in millions of dollars being spent on prosecuting two evangelical pastors because the Victorian Human Rights Commission sent representatives, agitated people, to go and hear them speak and then lodge a complaint. It was all artificial. It was designed to get some prosecutions going under the Religious Vilification Act. But it so discredited the cause, and I think we've now got a very strong case in arguing against any recommendation out of this federal inquiry into whether Australia should have religious anti-vilification laws. I conclude by saying, as I set out at the start, this is a big change in how Australia governs itself. I'm talking about the Charter. It represents a shift in power to judges under the New Zealand model or the Canadian model or the British model. The parliaments, which in theory have been able to overrule decisions of the courts, have never done it because politicians are reluctant to take on courts where the courts have said, here is a human rights abuse. And it'd be even harder to have our parliament overrule a court given the position of the Senate in the Australian system. The opposition parties normally have a majority in the Senate. The judges will have an accretion of power and they're not elected. You can go to governments, you can't send delegations to judges to put your point of view. This is very, very significant for the churches. If you've seen your federal member of parliament on no other matter, you really should go and see him or her on this. There's a window of opportunity. The federal government will make a decision. It may be sooner rather than later. There is a real prospect, a stronger prospect as the alternative, that they could be attracted to a backdoor version of a Charter of Rights. You can have a big impact if you take a significant delegation in there to argue to the MP that it's not something Australia needs or the Australian electorate has asked for or the Australian electorate would endorse at a referendum. If it enters by the back door, you could be regretting it for a very long time. Thank you.